Hello YouTube, today I'm going to show you how to change the brakes on a 200 CDI GLK. These are the tools I used for the job. Starting out with an E20 torque socket, an impact driver, WD-40, a tool to compress the brake cylinders. That's optional, you can press it by hand as well. A hammer just in case the rotor is stuck. Some brake cleaner, some new bolts for the calipers, some pliers, plenty of gloves. It's a pretty dirty job. New brake pads and rotors, wire brushes, a good jack, new brake wear indicators, a ratchet and some breaker bars, a torque wrench, some brake grease to avoid the squeal, retaining screw for the new rotor, an M15 socket, some Loctite blue or equivalent, a 17mm socket, some jack stands, and a T30 Torx bit. Well, I started up by lifting the car up. Really important to use a good jack for that, and not the one that comes with the vehicle. You want all the safety you can get. Always put some jack stands under it. Nothing would be more damaging or dangerous if the car falls off the jack. Next, you take the wheel off. I use an impact wrench just because it's easier, but if you don't have one, you can just use the tool that comes with the vehicle as well. Time-wise, the whole job is probably going to take you about 2 hours or so. It helps if you have some good weather. Alright, there's our brake. First thing we're going to do is take the brake caliper off. There are 2 hexagon screws, fairly easy to access. I believe they are 15mm. You need to have some pliers to keep the metal tab there from spinning. This one I was able to hold it with my hand, but especially when you tighten them, pliers come in handy. They say to replace the bolts. I replaced them. They came with the brakes. Once you have those 2 out, you can pull the entire caliper a little bit towards you to compress the brake cylinder. It helps if you open the brake fluid reservoir, otherwise you're not going to be able to compress the cylinder. And then the whole assembly comes off. You can see the old brake wear indicator in there. You could probably reuse it, but my brakes came with a new one, so I'm going to replace it. It just attaches to one of the brake pads. Interestingly, the GLK only has one wear indicator on the right side of the vehicle. So if you start on the left side, don't be confused that there is no brake wear indicator. So I'm pulling the whole assembly a little bit towards me, and then the whole thing will come off. And there you can see the brake cylinder. Use a piece of wire to hang the whole assembly from the shock, so that there's no stress on the brake line, and you have some room to work with. The brake pads will just kind of pop out. Important to mention that the rear one has the tab that holds the brake wear indicator. Now I'm going to put some WD-40 on these bolts that hold the saddle, because those things are on tight and they're difficult to get off. Especially because you can't get an impact wrench easily in there, so it's just elbow grease. I don't know if that does anything, might just be psychological, but I believe it's easier to let that soak in a little. That is the E20 socket. Without that, there's no way you can do the job. So they use Loctite on those, so once they're loose, they're still kind of tricky to get out. As you can see, I'm using a long extension for extra leverage. So finally got that off. Next we're going to use a T30 bit to get the old rotor off. They're not on very tight, so they merely just hold the rotor in place. Alright, the job is half done. Now you want to clean the surface as good as you can. I use a wire brush attached to a drill. You can also use a hand brush, but this is just making it a lot easier. Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm applying some grease on it just so that the rotors don't rot onto it, because they can be tricky to get off if rust forms. So I hope this helps for the next time I have to take these off. Here's a new rotor. I'm going to secure that with a new screw. Added some Loctite to it, Loctite blue or equivalent. It only gets tight to like 10 Newton meters, so it's not super tight. It pretty much just holds it in place. The wheel bolts really give it the stability. I'm gonna reattach the saddle, put some Loctite on, and those things go on tight. Like those need to be in place quite tightly. I believe that like 180 or 190 Newton meter. I put the torque values at the beginning of this video. Alright, now we're attaching the new brake pad indicator to one of the brake pads. It's going to be the inner brake pad. The outer one is not going to have the tab. It just wouldn't fit, so just install it how you saw it when you first took it apart. And that just plugs in there. It's fairly straightforward. on the back of the brake pads, also not on the braking side. I'll apply some brake grease or brake service paste or whatever you want to call it. It's what's going to keep your brakes from squealing, and they're like $1 for a little pack like that, so that's definitely worth the money. The brake caliper should slide on fairly easy, and the whole assembly should be able to move freely, so you should be able to move the rotor back and forth. And then the only thing left is put the 2 caliper bolts back in, tighten them up, and you're good to go. Put the wheel back on. Forget to close your reservoir. It's also important then to check the fluid level. With mine, it was fine. I had lost so much fluid because of the brake wear that I didn't really worry too much about the canister overflowing. But if your canister is pretty full, you might have to siphon off some of the brake fluid. Because every time you compress the brake cylinder, fluid is going to bubble up into the reservoir. Alright, take the car off the jack, tighten the bolts, the wheel bolts, and take it for a little test drive. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to leave any comments you want. And have a great rest of your day.